The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but Meredith kept the cup between her palms anyway. Hospital waiting rooms at dawn had a particular kind of silence, not peaceful, just empty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that relentless mechanical drone that made everything feel temporary. She watched a maintenance worker mop the same 3 tiles over and over, pushing gray water in lazy circles. Her son Jake sat beside her, scrolling his phone with his thumb, and she noticed the watch first. Cartier, maybe, silver and clean. She hadn't bought him that. Tom certainly hadn't. Her late husband had worn a Timex for 30 years and refused to replace it even when the band started to fray. "You doing okay, Mom?" Jake glanced up, smile easy, and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. She nodded. "Just tired." "Yeah, surgery prep is brutal." He stretched his legs out, expensive loafers catching the light. "Hey, I wanted to talk to you about something before they take you back." Meredith sipped the cold coffee. Mistake, it tasted like pennies. "What's that?" Jake leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Serious face. The one he used to use when he wanted to borrow the car in high school. "I've been thinking about the vineyard." She set the cup down on the small table beside her chair. Outside the window, the sky was starting to bruise purple at the edges. Sunrise soon. Her surgery was scheduled for 7. They'd be calling her back any minute. What about it? "Well," he ran a hand through his hair, "you're not getting any younger. And with Dad gone, it's a lot for you to manage alone. I was talking to Sienna." He gestured vaguely toward the vending machines, where his girlfriend stood texting, her back to them. "And we think maybe it's time to consider selling." The word landed flat. Selling. Meredith looked at her hands. The IV port in her wrist was already taped down, ready. A nurse had done it an hour ago, efficient and kind, and told her to avoid bending her arm. She flexed her fingers slowly. "We've talked about this, Jake. I'm not selling." I know. He held up both hands, placating. "Not selling. Just, maybe simplifying. You could keep the house, obviously, but the land, the equipment, all that, it's a lot of overhead. You could live off the sale for the rest of your life. Travel, relax." Meredith thought about the vineyard as she'd left it yesterday afternoon. Luis had been pruning the Pinot vines, moving methodically down the rows with his clippers, and the air had smelled like cut wood and earth. She'd stood at the edge of the field for a long time, just watching. Tom used to say the land had a heartbeat if you listened close enough. She still heard it sometimes. "I don't want to travel," she said. Jake sighed. Not impatient exactly. More like a manager dealing with a difficult client. "Okay, we don't have to decide anything today, but there's some paperwork I need you to sign. Just administrative stuff, power of attorney, medical directives. In case anything happens during surgery." He pulled a folder from his messenger bag, leather, monogrammed, and set it on her lap. The papers inside were crisp, official-looking. Meredith's eyes were tired. The print swam a little. She saw her name at the top. Meredith Ann. No last name, just the first and middle. Strange. What is this? Just standard estate stuff. Jake clicked a pen, held it out to her. "The lawyer said we should have it all filed before any medical procedure. Just in case." "Just in case of what?" He smiled, gentle. "Mom, you're having surgery. It's routine, but still. We should be prepared." Sienna walked over then, heels clicking on the linoleum. She had one of those faces that looked good even under fluorescent light, sharp cheekbones, clear skin. She smiled at Meredith, warm but distant, the way people smile at strangers' babies. "How are you feeling?" "Fine," Meredith said. "Jake's just trying to make sure everything's taken care of." Sienna rested a hand on Jake's shoulder. Her nails were painted a deep red. "It's sweet, really. He's been so worried." Meredith looked down at the paperwork again. There were sticky tabs marking the signature lines, 3 of them. She tried to focus on the text, but the letters kept sliding away from her. She hadn't slept well. Anxiety, probably. Or maybe just age. 62 wasn't old, but it wasn't young either. "I'd like to read this first." Jake's smile tightened. "Just a fraction." "Of course. But the lawyer's waiting at his office. He needs it filed today. And your surgery's in—" He checked his watch. "The Cartier. 40 minutes. Then I'll sign it after. Mom." His voice dipped lower, quieter. The way he used to talk when he wanted something as a kid and knew she was on the fence. It's just a formality. I'm trying to help. She met his eyes. Brown, like Tom's. But Tom's had crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Jake's stayed smooth. She picked up the pen, felt its weight. Expensive. Heavier than it needed to be. Then she set it down on top of the folder. I'll look at it after, she said again. For a moment, nobody moved. Sienna's hand slid off Jake's shoulder. He stared at Meredith, and she watched something flicker across his face. Frustration, maybe, or calculation. Then he smiled again, easy as before, and folded the papers back into the folder. Sure, no problem. We'll talk later. Mrs. Meredith? A nurse appeared in scrubs covered with tiny cartoon cats, young, cheerful. We're ready for you. Meredith stood and her knees protested. Jake stood too, leaned in to kiss her forehead. His cologne was sharp, citrus and cedar. You're going to do great, he said softly. I'll be here when you wake up. She nodded, let the nurse take her arm. As they walked toward the double doors, she glanced back. Jake was already on his phone again, and Sienna was leaning close, whispering something. Their heads were bent together like co-conspirators. Or maybe just a couple. Hard to tell. The pre-op room was small and cold. Meredith changed into the gown, thin, flimsy, tied in the back, and sat on the edge of the bed. A different nurse came in, older, with gray streaks in her hair, and went through the checklist. Allergies, current medications, next of kin. Meredith answered automatically. Her mind was somewhere else. Back in the vineyard, maybe. Or further. She remembered the day Tom taught Jake how to test the grapes. Jake had been 19, home from college for the summer, and still loose-limbed and easy with his laughter. Tom had handed him the refractometer, shown him how to crush a berry and smear the juice on the glass. See that number? Tom had said. That's the sugar content. That's how you know when they're ready. Jake had nodded, squinting through the lens, and Meredith had stood nearby with the clipboard, recording the numbers he called out. The sun had been hot on her shoulders. Tom had been alive. Jake had been hers. The memory fractured when the nurse asked her to lie back. Meredith stared at the IV bag hanging above her, watching the clear liquid catch the light. She thought about the way Jake's fingers had fidgeted with that pen. The expensive pen. The one that matched the watch and the shoes and the girlfriend with the perfect nails. When had he become someone who needed things to look expensive? Tom had taught him that land was worth more than leather, that good work mattered more than good appearances. Or maybe Tom had tried to teach him that, and Jake just hadn't been listening. Any questions before we get started? The nurse asked. Meredith blinked. No, I'm fine. She wasn't really. But what was she supposed to say? My son just tried to get me to sign something I didn't understand, and I don't know why that scares me. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling tiles. Someone had put a sticker up there, a yellow smiley face. She wondered if it was meant to be comforting. It wasn't. The anesthesiologist came in next, a man with kind eyes and steady hands. He explained the process in a voice meant to soothe, and Meredith nodded at the right moments. She felt the cold rush of the sedative entering her bloodstream, felt her thoughts start to blur and soften. The last thing she saw before the world went dark was that smiley face sticker, peeling at one corner, holding on. 2 days later, Meredith woke up in a recovery room that smelled like antiseptic and something faintly sweet. Flowers, maybe, though she couldn't see any. Her mouth was dry, her abdomen ached in a distant, detached way, like the pain belonged to someone else. She turned her head and saw Claudia sitting in the chair by the window, her reading glasses perched on her nose, scrolling through Meredith's phone. Hey, Meredith croaked. Claudia looked up, smiled. There she is. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a truck. That's the anesthesia. It'll wear off. Claudia set the phone down on the table beside her. Jake's not here, by the way. He left yesterday. Said he had to get back to the city, work emergency. Meredith closed her eyes. Of course he did. That's fine. Is it? She opened her eyes again. Claudia was watching her with that look, the one she'd used since they were kids, the one that said, I know when you're lying. Claudia was 3 years younger, but had always been the sharper one. She'd gone to law school, worked as a paralegal for 20 years, and had a way of seeing through people that made her dangerous at poker and invaluable in a crisis. I don't know, Meredith admitted. Claudia picked up the phone again, frowned. You've got a bunch of missed calls from Luis. He's been trying to reach you since yesterday. Meredith's stomach tightened. Luis ran the vineyard, had for the past 8 years, since Tom's health started failing. He was steady, reliable, and didn't call unless something was wrong. What does he want? Didn't say, just asked you to call him back. Claudia tilted her head. What's going on, Mare? Meredith told her. About the hospital waiting room, the paperwork, Jake's insistence. She tried to remember exactly what he'd said, but the words kept slipping. Just administrative stuff, just in case. The lawyer's waiting. Claudia's face went very still as she listened. When Meredith finished, Claudia took off her glasses, cleaned them on her shirt, and put them back on. What kind of a paperwork? I don't know. I didn't read it. Did you sign it? No. Claudia let out a breath. Good, because that sounds like a transfer deed. The words didn't make sense at first. Meredith stared at her. What? A transfer deed. Or a quitclaim. Something to move ownership. Claudia stood, started pacing. She always paced when she was thinking. Why would he need you to sign something the day of your surgery? Why the rush? He said it was medical stuff, power of attorney. Medical POA doesn't need to be filed with a lawyer. You can do that at the hospital. Claudia stopped pacing, looked at her. Call Luis? Meredith's hands shook a little as she took the phone. She blamed the drugs. Luis picked up on the second ring. Meredith, thank God. Are you okay? I'm fine. What's wrong? I'm confused. His voice was tight. Jake called me 2 days ago. Said you approved selling some of the equipment. A broker came by yesterday to appraise the fermentation tanks. The room tilted. Meredith gripped the phone harder. I didn't approve anything. Silence. Then, he said you signed off on it. Said you wanted to downsize. I didn't sign anything. Her voice came out sharper than she meant. Luis, I didn't. Okay. He was quiet for a moment. Okay. I'll call the broker, tell him it was a mistake, but Meredith, what's going on? I don't know yet. I'll call you back. She hung up before he could ask anything else. Claudia was already pulling her laptop out of her bag. She sat down, fingers flying, over the keyboard. What's the vineyard address? Meredith told her. Claudia pulled up the county records, typed in the parcel number. The page loaded slowly. Meredith watched the little spinning wheel, felt her heartbeat in her throat. Outside the window, she could see a slice of parking lot, cars glinting in the afternoon sun. Normal life happening. People going to work, coming home, buying groceries. The world just kept moving. Then Claudia went very still. What? Meredith asked. Claudia turned the laptop around. On the screen was a document, a quitclaim deed. Filed 3 weeks ago, Meredith's name at the top, her signature at the bottom. The vineyard transferred from Meredith Ann to Jake Michael, sole owner. Meredith stared at the signature. It looked like hers. Almost. But the M in Meredith was wrong. She always looped it twice, a habit from 3rd grade when her teacher, Mrs. Chen, had praised her handwriting and said the double loop made it elegant. This one had a single swoosh. Clean. Simple. Not hers. He forged it, she whispered. Claudia closed the laptop. Her face was pale. Yeah, he did. The room felt too small suddenly. Meredith's chest tightened, and she couldn't tell if it was panic or pain, or just the aftermath of surgery catching up with her. She thought about Jake at 8 years old, standing in the kitchen with chocolate on his face, swearing he hadn't eaten the cake she'd made for Tom's birthday. She'd known he was lying. The evidence was literally on his chin, but she'd let him off easy. Told him to wash his face and don't do it again. Tom had said she was too soft, that Jake needed consequences or he'd never learn. Maybe Tom had been right. What do we do? Meredith asked. Claudia opened the laptop again, started typing. First, we document everything. Screenshot this, print it if we can. Then we call a lawyer, a real one, not whoever Jake's been working with. You can't afford not to. Claudia looked up, her eyes fierce. Mir, he stole your land, your home, everything you and Tom built. This isn't about money. This is about fighting back. Meredith nodded. Her throat felt tight. She looked around the recovery room, the beige walls, the generic landscape painting that could have been anywhere, the IV pole standing like a silent witness. She thought about the vineyard, the house. The Pinot vines Tom had planted the year Jake was born. 30 years of work, of waking before dawn to check frost damage, of bottling wine in the barn with blistered hands, of sitting on the porch with Tom in the evenings, watching the sun set over the hills, talking about next year's harvest like it was a promise they'd both keep. Jake had taken that. Or tried to. "Okay," she said. "Find me a lawyer." The door opened 20 minutes later, and Jake walked in holding a bouquet of daisies. Cheerful, smiling. "Hey, Mom. You're awake. How are you feeling?" Meredith looked at him. At the flowers. At the watch on his wrist. At Sienna hovering in the doorway behind him, her expression carefully neutral. Claudia stood up from her chair, slow and deliberate, and held out the laptop. "Want to explain this?" Jake glanced at the screen. His face went carefully blank. Professional. The same expression he used in photos on his LinkedIn. "That's a mistake," he said. "I'll get it fixed." "A mistake," Claudia repeated. "The lawyer filed the wrong draft. I told him to hold off until after Mom's surgery, but he must have, Jake shook his head, set the flowers on the table. "I'll call him. It's not a big deal." "Did you forge her signature?" Claudia's voice was flat. Jake looked at Meredith, not Claudia. "Mom, you know I wouldn't—" "Did you?" Meredith asked. He hesitated just a second, then, "It's complicated." "Uncomplicate." Jake sat down in the other chair, rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red. Tired. Or maybe just a good actor. Hard to know anymore. Sienna's family wanted collateral for a business loan. They needed to see I had assets. Real assets, not just potential. I panicked. I was going to reverse it after your surgery, I swear. Meredith felt something crack open inside her chest. Not anger, not yet. Just a vast, hollow space where something used to be. "You forged my name. I was going to fix it." "You forged my name," she said again, slower. "Mom, you don't understand. Sienna's father is connected. This loan could set us up for life, but he needed proof I wasn't just some—" Jake stopped, swallowed. He needed to see I had stability, property. I thought if I could just show him the deed, get the loan approved, then transfer it back before you even noticed. "Before I noticed?" Meredith's voice was very quiet. "You stole my land and hoped I wouldn't notice?" "I didn't steal it. I was borrowing the paperwork. It's still yours. It was always going to stay yours." Claudia made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. "That's the worst legal defense I've ever heard." Jake stood up, hands spread. "This is a misunderstanding. I can fix this. Just give me a week. I'll get the lawyer to file the reversal, and it'll be like it never happened." Meredith watched him. Really watched him. The way he held himself, shoulders back, chin up, like he was pitching a business deal instead of confessing to fraud. The way his eyes kept flicking to Sienna in the doorway, like he was checking to make sure she was still there. Still his. Still worth whatever this cost. "Get out," Meredith said. He blinked. "What?" "Get out of my room." Her voice was steady, calm. She barely recognized it. "Now." Jake looked at Sienna, then back at Meredith. "Let's talk about this when you're feeling better. You're upset." "The surgery, the medication. I'm not upset because of the surgery." Meredith met his eyes. "I'm upset because my son is a thief." His face flushed. "That's not fair." "Out." "Mom." "I said get out." The words came out louder than she meant, and her abdomen seized with pain. She gasped, pressed a hand to the incision site. Claudia was at her side immediately, pressing the call button for the nurse. Jake stood there for another moment, looking lost. Looking young, almost, like the boy he used to be. Then Sienna touched his arm, whispered something, and he grabbed his jacket. They left without another word. The door clicked shut behind them. The room was very quiet. Meredith breathed through the pain, waiting for it to subside. A nurse came in, checked her vitals, adjusted her medication, told her to rest, to avoid stress. Sure, what could go wrong? When the nurse left, Claudia sat back down. "You okay?" Meredith stared at the daisies. They were already wilting. Cheap ones, grocery store flowers, the kind you grab on your way to the hospital because you forgot until the last minute, or because you don't really care. "I don't know." "That's fair." Claudia pulled out her phone. I'm texting my friend at the firm. She does estate law. We'll get this fixed. Meredith nodded. She felt very tired suddenly, the kind of tired that sleep wouldn't fix. She thought about Tom again, about the promise she'd made at his funeral, to keep the vineyard running, to protect what they'd built. She'd thought the threat would come from the bank or the weather or her own failing body. She hadn't expected it to come from her son. Claudia? Yeah? When did he become like this? Claudia was quiet for a long time, then, I don't know, Mare. Maybe he always was and we just didn't want to see it. That was the part that hurt most, not the forgery, not the theft, but the possibility that she'd been blind all along, that the son she thought she knew had never really existed. Meredith closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd start fixing this. Tonight she just needed to breathe. The rest of the day passed in a blur of nurses and painkillers and sleep that didn't quite feel like rest. Claudia stayed, brought her soup from the cafeteria, terrible and salty, and Meredith ate it anyway because her sister had walked 6 floors to get it. They didn't talk about Jake. There wasn't much to say yet. The facts were simple. He'd forged her signature, filed a fraudulent deed, and tried to cover it up. Everything else was just details. Around dinner time, Claudia's phone rang. She stepped into the hallway to take it, came back 5 minutes later with a grim smile. That was Renata, my friend, and she can see you next week. She's already pulling the county records, checking for any other filings we don't know about. There could be more? Better to check. Claudia sat down, pulled out a notepad. We need to make a list. Every account with your name on it. Every asset. Bank statements, insurance policies, the deed to the house, everything. If he forged one signature, he could have forged others. Meredith's head hurt. I don't even know where half that stuff is. We'll find it. Claudia started writing. Do you have a safe deposit box? At the credit union. Tom set it up years ago. Good. We'll check it. What about passwords? Does Jake have access to any of your accounts? Meredith thought. I gave him my email password once, when I was traveling and needed him to print a boarding pass. Claudia's pen stopped. When was that? 2 years ago? Maybe 3? Change it. Tonight. Change every password you have. Claudia looked up. I'm serious, Mare. If he's been planning this for weeks or months, we don't know what else he's accessed. The thought made Meredith's skin crawl. She imagined Jake sitting in his apartment, scrolling through her emails, looking for opportunities, for weaknesses. It felt like a violation worse than the forgery. More intimate. Okay. That night, alone in the dark, Meredith pulled up the photo on her phone, the one Tom had taken the year they planted the Pinot vines. The light had been golden late afternoon, and the stakes were all in neat rows, stretching toward the hills. She zoomed in on the soil. The stakes. The promise of something that would take years to mature but would be worth the wait. She remembered that day. Tom's hands covered in dirt, the way he'd kissed her forehead and said, "This is for Jake, for his future." And she'd believed him, believed that the land would be a gift, a legacy, something solid their son could build on. Jake had seen it differently. He'd seen an asset, something to leverage. Her hands didn't shake anymore. She felt very clear, very still. She opened her texts, scrolled to Claudia's name, saw her own message from earlier. Find me a lawyer. Claudia had already responded. On it. Rest. I'll handle it. Meredith set the phone down. Tomorrow she'd start fighting back. Tonight she just needed to remember who she was. Not Jake's mother, not Tom's widow, just herself. Meredith. The woman who'd learned to graft vines at 40, who'd run a business while her husband was dying, who'd stood in that field alone after the funeral and decided to keep going. She could do this. She would do this. Outside her window, the hospital parking lot was mostly empty, a few cars scattered under the yellow lights. She watched a nurse walk to her sedan, unlock it, sit inside for a moment before starting the engine. Just breathing, probably. Stealing a moment of quiet before driving home. Meredith understood that. Sometimes you needed to just sit. Just be still before the next thing. She closed her eyes and let herself drift. The law office smelled like lemon polish and old paper. Meredith sat in a leather chair that squeaked every time she shifted, watching Renata spread documents across the conference table like tarot cards. Outside the window, the city moved, cars honking, people rushing, life happening at a pace that felt alien after a week in the hospital. Renata was younger than Meredith expected, maybe 40, with silver streaks in her dark hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She handled the paperwork with the easy confidence of someone who'd seen worse. "Okay," Renata said, tapping a highlighter against her teeth. "The good news is this is straightforward fraud. The signature's clearly forged. I can see it even without an expert. The bad news is he's family. That complicates things." Meredith's abdomen still ached when she moved too fast. The incision was healing, but slowly. "How?" "Judges hate family disputes. They'll push mediation first, try to get you to settle quietly, and if you pursue criminal charges, the DA might not touch it. Adult children defrauding parents, it happens more than you'd think. System's not built to handle it." Claudia leaned forward. "So what are our options?" Renata pulled out a legal pad, started making notes. "Civil suit for fraud. We file a claim to reverse the deed, petition the court to restore ownership. We can also request damages, legal fees, emotional distress. But Meredith, I need to ask, do you want him arrested?" The question hung in the air. Meredith thought about Jake at 6, skinning his knee on the gravel driveway, crying in her lap while she cleaned the scrape. Jake at 12, staying up all night to finish a school project, falling asleep at the kitchen table with glue on his fingers. Jake at 19, laughing in the vineyard with his father. "No," she said quietly, "I don't want him in jail." "That makes it easier." Renata made a note. "We'll file the civil claim, demand reversal of the deed. His lawyer will push back, claim it was a misunderstanding, offer to settle. That's when we negotiate." "Negotiate what?" Meredith asked. "Terms. You get the vineyard back, obviously. But what else do you want? Do you want him out of your will? Off any joint accounts? A restraining order?" Meredith hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd been too focused on just surviving, on getting out of the hospital, on understanding what had happened. "I want the vineyard, and I want him financially independent. No more help from me." Renata wrote it down. "Okay, we can work with that. But be prepared. This could get ugly. Family cases always do." They spent the next hour going through everything. Bank statements, insurance policies, the deed to the house. Renata's assistant made copies, organized them into color-coded folders. Meredith signed forms until her hand cramped. Power of attorney, real this time, for Claudia in case something happened. An affidavit about the forgery, a timeline of events. By the time they finished, the sun was setting outside. Renata walked them to the elevator, shook Meredith's hand. "I'll file tomorrow. Expect his lawyer to respond within a week. Try not to engage with Jake directly. Let everything go through me." "And if he calls?" Meredith asked. "Don't answer. I mean it. Anything he says could complicate things later." The elevator doors closed. Claudia pressed the button for the lobby, and they descended in silence. Meredith watched the numbers light up, counting down. 7, 6, 5. She felt hollowed out. Empty. Like she'd left something important in that conference room and couldn't remember what. When they reached the lobby, Claudia touched her arm. "You okay?" "I don't know." Meredith pushed through the revolving door, out into the evening air. It was cooler now, fall settling in. She could smell rain coming. "I keep thinking about what you said, that maybe he was always like this." No, I mean it. What if I missed it? What if there were signs and I just..." She stopped, shook her head. "Tom saw it, didn't he? That's why they fought so much those last few years." Claudia was quiet. They walked to the parking garage, footsteps echoing. Finally, "Yeah, Tom saw it, but he didn't know what to do about it either." That was something, at least. The knowledge that she hadn't been alone in her blindness, that even Tom, who'd known Jake since birth, had struggled to reconcile the boy they'd raised with the man he was becoming. 3 days later, Renata called. His lawyer responded. "They want to meet." Meredith stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, staring at the calendar on the wall. Tom's handwriting was still there, from 2 years ago. Notes about pruning schedules, bottling dates. She hadn't had the heart to erase it. Already? They're scared. The forgery's too obvious. They know they'll lose if this goes to court. Renata paused. "They're offering to sign the vineyard back if you drop all claims." "That's it?" "That's the opening offer. We can push for more." Meredith thought about it. About what she wanted, really. Not money. She had enough to live on. Not revenge. That would just leave everyone bloody. What about my will? Can we make the transfer conditional on him agreeing to be removed from it? Absolutely. What else? I'll pay off his college loans, as severance. After that, he's on his own. Renata was quiet for a moment. That's generous. It's final, Meredith said. I don't want him coming back in 5 years asking for help. This ends it. Okay, I'll draw up the terms. We'll meet next week. The settlement meeting was held in a conference room with windows overlooking the courthouse. Meredith arrived early with Claudia and Renata, and they sat up on one side of the long table. When Jake walked in, Sienna was with him. They looked tired. Jake's suit was wrinkled, and Sienna's makeup couldn't quite hide the shadows under her eyes. Jake's lawyer was older, silver-haired, with the weary expression of someone who'd taken this case as a favor and regretted it. Nobody shook hands. They just sat down. Renata slid the settlement agreement across the table. Jake's lawyer read it, lips moving slightly. Jake stared at the table. Sienna watched Meredith with an expression that was hard to read. Guilt, maybe, or just discomfort. These terms are acceptable, Jake's lawyer said finally, but my client would like to say something first. Renata looked at Meredith. Meredith nodded. Jake looked up. His eyes were red. Mom, He stopped, swallowed. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. Meredith waited. When he didn't continue, she said, Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught? He flinched. Both. I don't know. I wasn't thinking straight. Sienna's father kept pushing, and I wanted to prove I was someone worth investing in, someone who had assets, stability. I thought I could fix it before you knew. You thought you could steal from me, and I'd never notice. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Jake? Meredith's voice was calm. Too calm. Explain it to me. Make it make sense. He looked at Sienna. She looked away. I can't, he said quietly. There's no good explanation. I was selfish, desperate. I made a terrible choice. You made several, Claudia said. The forgery, the filing, calling Luis to sell the equipment, lying about it when we found out. Jake's lawyer cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on the settlement. Yes, Renata said. Let's. My client's terms are clear. Full transfer of the vineyard back to her name. Removal from all estate documents. Payment of student loans. She slid another paper across. In the amount of $73,000, after which no further financial support. Jake's lawyer nodded. And in exchange, no criminal charges. No civil suit. Clean break. Clean break, Renata confirmed. Jake stared at the settlement agreement. So that's it? I signed this and we're, what? Not family anymore? Meredith felt something twist in her chest. We'll always be family, Jake. But family doesn't mean I keep supporting you when you've proven you can't be trusted. I made one mistake. You made a choice. There's a difference. She leaned forward. If you'd come to me and asked for help, told me about Sienna's father, about the loan, I would have worked with you. We could have figured something out. But you didn't ask. You took. And then you lied. I know. His voice cracked. I know I did. Then sign the paper. He picked up the pen. His hand shook slightly. Meredith watched him read through the terms, watched his face as he realized what he was agreeing to. No inheritance, no safety net, just himself and whatever he could build without her. He signed. Renata notarized it. Jake's lawyer signed as witness. The whole thing took less than 5 minutes. When it was done, Jake stood. He looked at Meredith one more time. For what it's worth, Dad would have been ashamed of me. I know that. Meredith's throat tightened. Yeah, he would have been. Jake nodded. He left with Sienna and his lawyer. The door closed behind them. The room was very quiet. Renata gathered the papers. I'll file this today. The deed should be reversed within a week. Thank you, Meredith said. After Renata left, Claudia sat down beside her. How do you feel? Meredith thought about it. Empty, relieved, sad. That's fair. Claudia squeezed her hand. You did the right thing? Did I? Meredith stared at the empty chairs across the table. What if I just lost my son forever? Mir, you didn't lose him. He lost himself. There's a difference. Maybe. Meredith wasn't sure yet. She stood, joints protesting, and walked to the window. Down below, she could see Jake and Sienna on the sidewalk. They were talking or maybe arguing. It was hard to tell from this distance. Then Sienna turned and walked away. Jake watched her go, shoulders slumped, and for a moment he looked so young, so lost. Meredith turned away from the window. Some things you couldn't fix. Some people had to figure it out themselves. The vineyard at dusk felt different now. Meredith walked the rows slowly, her incision still tender, and watched the sun sink behind the hills. Luis had kept everything running while she'd been gone. The vines were pruned, the equipment maintained, the soil tested. She'd called him the day after the settlement, told him what had happened. He'd been quiet for a long time, then said, "I'm sorry, Meredith. That's hard." It was, but it was also done. She stopped at the edge of the Pinot section. The vines Tom had planted 30 years ago. The grapes were starting to form, small and green. By harvest, they'd be deep purple, heavy with sugar. She crouched down, touched the soil. It was cool and damp from yesterday's rain. Good drainage, good bones. Meredith? Luis appeared at the end of the row carrying a clipboard. You got a minute? Sure. He walked over, handed her the clipboard. Harvest projections. We're looking at a good yield this year. Better than last. She scanned the numbers. This is great, Luis. Yeah, I was thinking, if you're up for it, maybe we try for organic certification this year. It's a process, but it'd open up new markets. Meredith looked at him. He was in his 50s, weathered and steady, and he'd worked this land almost as long as she had. You'd be willing to take that on? If you are. He shrugged. I figure we've kept this place running this long. Might as well make it better. She smiled. Let's do it. They spent the next hour walking the vineyard, talking about soil amendments and pest management, and all the small, endless details that kept a vineyard alive. It felt good. Normal. Like maybe life could be simple again if she let it. When Luis left, Meredith stayed. The sky had gone violet, stars starting to appear. She sat on the porch steps, the same steps she and Tom used to sit on, back when Jake was little and the future felt certain. Her phone buzzed, a text from Claudia. How are you? Meredith typed back. Okay, at the vineyard. It's beautiful tonight. Good. You deserve beautiful. She set the phone down. In the distance, she could hear the wind moving through the vines, that soft rustling sound that always reminded her of breathing. Tom had been right. The land did have a heartbeat. You just had to be still enough to hear it. A month later, a letter arrived. Meredith almost didn't open it. The return address just said Sienna, no last name, and she'd been ready to throw it away. But curiosity won. She opened it in the kitchen, standing by the window. The letter was short. Sienna apologizing. Saying she hadn't known about the forged deed until after it was filed. Saying they'd broken up. Saying she was sorry for her part in everything. Meredith read it twice, then set it on the counter. She believed Sienna, not that it changed anything. The damage was done. She didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing to say. Life settled into a rhythm. Meredith healed. The incision faded to a pale line across her abdomen. She started working in the vineyard again, just a few hours a day at first, then longer. Luis introduced her to a young woman named Maya, who wanted to apprentice as a winemaker. Maya was 23, eager, full of questions. Meredith taught her the same things Tom had taught Jake: how to test the grapes, read the soil, feel the land. Maya listened, took notes, asked smart questions. She reminded Meredith of herself at that age, hungry to learn, to build something. One evening, after Maya had left for the day, Meredith walked back to the house and found Claudia sitting on the porch with takeout containers. "Thought you might be hungry," Claudia said. They ate in comfortable silence. When Claudia's phone rang, she glanced at it, silenced it. "Jake," she said. Meredith's chest tightened. "What does he want?" "I don't know. He's called a few times. Left messages asking if you'd reconsider." "Reconsider what?" "The terms. He wants back in the will." Meredith set down her fork. What did you tell him? That it's not my call, it's yours. Claudia looked at her. Do you want to talk to him? Meredith thought about it. About Jake's voice on the other end of the line. About what he might say. About whether any of it would matter. No, she said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Okay. Claudia picked up her container again. Then we don't? They finished eating as the sun set. The sky went from violet to indigo to black. Meredith thought about Tom, about the promises they'd made to each other, to protect the land, to pass it on. She'd kept the first promise. The second, well, maybe it would pass to Maya someday, or someone else who loved it the way it deserved. That night, Meredith couldn't sleep. She got up, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table with the vineyard log. Tom's handwriting was on the first page, notes from the year they'd started. She flipped through slowly, reading his observations about weather patterns, soil pH, harvest dates. His handwriting got shakier toward the end when the illness had taken hold. The last entry was from 3 weeks before he died. Good year. Keep going. She picked up a pen. Under Tom's last note, she wrote, Continued. M. Then she added the date and a brief note about the harvest projections, about Maya, about organic certification, about the future that was still happening, even without him, even without Jake. She closed the log and sat there for a while, holding her tea, feeling the weight of the quiet house around her. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was hers. And maybe that was enough. In the morning, Meredith walked out to the vineyard as the sun rose. The air was cool and clean, and she could see dew sparkling on the vines. Luis was already there, checking the irrigation lines. Maya would arrive soon, ready to learn. The land stretched out in neat rows, patient and alive, waiting for the next season. Waiting for her. Meredith touched one of the vines, felt the rough bark under her palm. Tom had planted this one. She remembered the day, remembered his hands in the soil, his certainty that it would grow, and it had. 30 years later, still here, still producing. She picked up the clipboard from the porch railing, the one Luis had left for her. On the first page were the day's tasks. Routine things, necessary things. She added her own note at the bottom, a reminder to call about the organic certification paperwork. The vineyard hummed around her, birds starting to wake up, wind moving through the leaves, that heartbeat Tom had taught her to hear. Meredith looked out over the land, hers again, finally, fully, and felt something settle inside her. Not peace exactly, but presence. The knowledge that she was here, still standing, still growing, that was enough. That was everything. She opened the log one more time, looked at what she'd written the night before, continued. M. 2 words that held a whole world, a whole future. She closed it, tucked it under her arm, and walked into the vines to begin the day's work. The courthouse steps were steeper than Meredith remembered. She paused halfway up, hand on the iron railing, catching her breath. The incision pulled when she climbed, a dull reminder that her body was still knitting itself back together. Claudia waited at the top, holding both their coffees, and didn't say anything about Meredith's slow pace. That was the thing about sisters. They knew when to push and when to just stand there patient. Inside, the hallways echoed. Their shoes clicked on marble floors that had seen decades of disputes, divorces, custody battles. Family destroying family in increments. Renata met them outside courtroom C, sharp in a navy suit, her briefcase efficiently organized. They're already here, she said. Jake, Sienna, and their lawyer. Judge Pacheco is running 20 minutes behind, so we wait. They sat on a wooden bench worn smooth by anxious hands. Meredith could see Jake through the courtroom window, just a glimpse of his profile turned toward Sienna. They weren't touching. That was new. Or maybe just strategic. People performed differently when they knew they were being watched. You don't have to see him, Renata said quietly. I can handle this part myself. Meredith shook her head. I need to be here. I need to see it through. What she didn't say, she needed to look at Jake one more time and know for certain that she was doing the right thing. That this wasn't grief making her cruel or fear making her reckless. That this was simply necessary. The bailiff called them in. The courtroom was smaller than Meredith expected, less dramatic. Judge Pacheco was a black woman in her 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the tired expression of someone who'd mediated too many family wars. She read through the settlement agreement with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen this exact scenario play out in different clothes, different names, same essential betrayal. Mr. Jake, she said, looking over her glasses, do you understand that by signing this agreement, you're waiving all rights to your mother's estate? That means no inheritance, no claim to property, no financial support beyond the one-time payment outlined here. Jake stood. His voice was steady. Yes, Your Honor. And Mrs. Meredith, you understand this is binding? Once I approve this, there's no changing your mind in 6 months or a year when emotions have settled. Meredith stood too. Her legs felt stronger today. I understand. Judge Pacheco signed. The bailiff witnessed, and just like that, 32 years of motherhood reconfigured itself into a legal document filed in triplicate. Outside, the sky had clouded over. Meredith stood on the courthouse steps again, this time descending, and watched Jake and Sienna walk to their car. They moved like strangers forced to share an elevator, close but not connected. At the car, Sienna said something sharp. Jake's shoulders hunched. She got in the passenger side, slammed the door. He stood there for a moment, one hand on the roof, looking back toward the courthouse. Meredith didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him. She just watched until he got in the car and drove away. You okay? Claudia asked. Ask me tomorrow, Meredith said. That night she couldn't eat. Claudia had brought lasagna, homemade, the kind Tom used to make on Sundays, and Meredith pushed it around her plate until Claudia finally said, Stop pretending. Just put it away. They sat on the porch instead. The vineyard was dark except for the security lights Luis had installed near the equipment shed. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes were calling to each other, that eerie yipping that always sounded like laughter. Do you think I'm a bad mother? Meredith asked. Claudia was quiet for a long time. Then, I think you're a mother who got hurt and chose to protect herself. That's not bad. That's survival. Tom would have handled this differently. Tom's not here. Claudia's voice was gentle but firm, and you can't keep asking what he would have done. He's not the one who has to live with these choices. You are. Meredith pulled her cardigan tighter. The September nights were getting cold. Soon it would be harvest season, the busiest time of year when every day counted and sleep became optional. She used to love it. The organized chaos, the smell of crushed grapes, the satisfaction of seeing a year's work come to fruition. She wondered if it would feel different this year, if everything would feel different now. I got an email from Maya, she said, changing the subject. She found a cooperative in Oregon that does organic certification consulting, wants to set up a call. That's good. She's sharp, that one. Yeah. Meredith smiled a little. She reminds me of Jake when he was young, before he... She stopped. Before. Claudia reached over, squeezed her hand. They sat like that for a while, listening to the coyotes and the wind and the quiet hum of the vineyard, existing, growing, continuing despite everything. 2 weeks after the courthouse, Meredith was in the barn checking fermentation temperatures when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Mom. Jake's voice. Rough, like he'd been crying or hadn't slept. Meredith set down the thermometer. You're not supposed to call me directly. I know, He stopped. Started again. Sienna left. For real this time. Took all her stuff. Meredith waited. When he didn't continue, she said, I'm sorry. Are you? Yes. I didn't want you to lose everything, Jake, just to learn something. He laughed bitter. Well, I learned. I learned that I'm exactly as selfish as you thought I was. That Dad was right about me. That I destroy everything I touch. That's not... Meredith stopped herself. She wanted to comfort him, to fall back into the old pattern of soothing his wounds and telling him he was better than his worst choices. But that's what had led here. Years of smoothing over, making excuses, enabling. Jake, I can't fix this for you. I'm not asking you to. I don't know. I wanted to hear your voice. Something in Meredith's chest cracked open. Not forgiveness, not yet. But something softer than the anger she'd been carrying. How are you doing? Really? I'm broke, unemployed, living in a studio apartment in the bad part of town. My credit's destroyed because I defaulted on the loan after Sienna's dad pulled out. He exhaled shakily. I'm a mess, Mom. A complete mess. Then clean it up. How? The same way anyone does. One day at a time. Get a job. Pay your bills. Stop looking for shortcuts? She paused. Stop looking for someone else to save you. Silence. Then, I don't know if I can. You can. You just don't want to. Meredith's voice was steady. And that's the difference, Jake. That's what you need to figure out. She heard him breathing on the other end. Finally, I'm sorry. For all of it. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. I know you do. But sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Actions do, so when you're ready to show me instead of tell me, call Claudia. She'll let me know. And if I do, if I actually get my life together, will you let me back in? Meredith looked around the barn, at the stainless steel tanks Tom had saved for 3 years to buy, at the oak barrels they'd imported from France, at the clipboard hanging by the door with harvest schedules in her handwriting and Tom's and now Maya's. 3 generations of work, 3 generations of care? I don't know, she said honestly. Ask me in a year. She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking. She sat down on an overturned crate and let herself cry. Not for what she'd lost, but for what she'd had to do. For the hardness she'd had to grow inside herself like scar tissue. Necessary, but still painful. When the tears stopped, she washed her face in the barn sink, cold water shocking her back to the present. Then she picked up the clipboard and got back to work. The grapes didn't care about her heartbreak. They just kept growing, patient and indifferent, waiting for harvest. That was the gift of the land. It demanded presence. It required her to show up every day regardless of how she felt. And somehow, in showing up, she found she could keep going. Maya arrived an hour later with soil samples and questions about sulfite levels. They worked until sunset, side by side, talking about chemistry and timing and the art of knowing when to intervene and when to let nature take its course. You're a good teacher, Maya said as they packed up for the day. Meredith smiled. I had a good teacher once. I'm just passing it on. She locked the barn and walked back to the house. The porch light was on. Claudia must have stopped by and left it burning. Small kindnesses, the kind that held you together when everything else was falling apart. Inside, Meredith made tea and opened the vineyard log. She wrote about the day's work, about Maya's questions, about the phone call with Jake. Not the details, just spoke with Jay, still learning. Let the future decide what that meant. She closed the log and sat at the table, hands wrapped around her mug, feeling the steam on her face. Outside, the vineyard stretched into darkness. 30 acres of vines, all still hers, all still growing. Tomorrow she'd call about the organic certification. Tomorrow she'd teach Maya about harvest protocols. Tomorrow she'd keep going. Tonight she just sat with the quiet and let herself be exactly where she was.